I had gone nearly 9 years without hearing another human voice inside these walls. Not a knock, not a whisper, not even the echo of my own voice, because I'd stopped talking to myself years ago. Silence had become my only companion, loyal and undemanding. Out here, in this house, tucked behind a mountain ridge and wrapped in miles of dry pine and stubborn wind, silence was survival. I had chosen it, embraced it, built my entire life around keeping it unbroken. But that morning, though, I didn't know it yet, that silence began to die. It started like any other day. I fixed the loose shutter on the east side of the house before the wind picked up, fed the hens what few remained, and cut a few logs to dry before winter. The sun hadn't yet burned through the morning mist, and the air still carried that brittle chill that reminded you how far from comfort you'd drifted. I liked it that way. Every creak in my knees and every ache in my back was a kind of proof I was still here, still enduring, not quite living, not anymore, but surviving. I was stacking the last log when I heard it. Faint, distant, a sound that didn't belong. At first I froze, convinced it was some echo or trick of the forest. Maybe a coyote, maybe the wind howling through rock in a way I hadn't heard before. But then it came again, softer this time but unmistakably human. A voice. My heart began to pound in a way it hadn't in years. Not from fear, but from the rush of something long buried and almost forgotten. Alertness. The old instinct of a man who once had something to lose. I wiped my hands, reached for the old rifle propped against the porch railing, not from paranoia, but habit. You don't live this far out without certain precautions. Strangers didn't just wander through here. The road leading to my property was so narrow and worn, it didn't even show up on most maps anymore. I stepped off the porch and scanned the tree line, the path that wound through the ravine and came up from the east side, the only side someone might approach from if they didn't want to be seen. Nothing. Just the wind again, and the slow creak of trees stretching toward the sky. And then movement. 3 shapes emerged through the thinning mist. Slow, uneven, almost spectral. For a moment, I thought I was seeing ghosts. But they were real flesh and blood. 3 women. Their clothes were torn, shoes caked in mud, and they walked like their legs were no longer sure what solid ground felt like. 2 of them were carrying children in her arms, the other barely managing to cling to her mother's side, and the 3rd woman had another child draped over her back with a scarf tied across her chest. They moved like shadows, but the fear in their eyes was real enough to cut the air. They didn't see me at first. I stayed behind the old birch tree near the shed, watching, measuring. I'd seen this before. Not these women, but desperation. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes every footstep a prayer for safety. Something had driven them here. And I knew better than most that no one ends up at a place like this by accident. When they finally caught sight of the house, their faces didn't light up with hope. Just exhaustion. They didn't speed up. They barely moved at all. I stepped forward, and one of the children noticed first a small boy with a sunken face and eyes too old for his body. He tugged on his mother's arm and pointed toward me. I didn't speak. Not yet. I waited. The tallest woman, maybe in her early 30s, raised her arm in a half wave. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. When she tried again, her voice was rough and cracked, like someone who hadn't used it in days. "We don't want trouble," she said. We need help." I lowered the rifle. That's when I realized everything in my life was about to change. The moment I lowered my rifle, a strange quiet fell between us, heavier than the weight of all the years I'd spent alone. They moved toward the porch, slowly, almost cautiously, as if every step was a question I might refuse to answer. The oldest woman, her face streaked with dirt, and exhaustion held her head high, though her eyes betrayed the fatigue and fear she carried. Behind her, the other 2 women flanked her, clutching children who had stopped crying but didn't quite trust the stillness of this place. I stepped aside and nodded toward the door, an invitation born less from kindness and more from a grudging acknowledgement that whatever peace I'd found in silence was about to shatter. They entered, their boots thudding softly on the wooden floorboards, stirring up dust long settled in the corners of the room. The air was stale, the windows grimy from neglect, and the furniture sparse. An old chair, a bench I'd built years ago but never used, and a rickety table scarred by time and weather. The children eyed everything with wide, wary eyes, like this new place was a foreign land they weren't sure they wanted to claim. The smallest girl clung to the oldest woman's skirts, a silent shadow, while a boy, no older than 8, kept close to his mother, occasionally glancing toward me as if measuring whether I was friend or threat. I stood against the doorway, feeling the unfamiliar ache of human presence crowding the empty rooms I'd long treated as my sanctuary. The women exchanged glances, their shared exhaustion knitting them together more tightly than any spoken word. Finally, the oldest woman broke the silence, her voice low but steady. She said they'd been running for days since the sun had first risen over the eastern hills. They'd come from a boarding house in town, a place that had promised shelter but delivered chains. Chains not of iron but of debts and threats, of control and cruelty disguised as law. The man who ran the place was no man of mercy. He saw desperation as an opportunity, women as commodities, and children as leverage. When they'd refused to comply with his demands, he'd given them an ultimatum to pay an impossible price or leave by dawn. With no other choice, they'd fled under cover of darkness, following rumors of my land, a place where a man lived alone and might show mercy, or at least not turn them away. As they spoke, my mind drifted to the past I'd tried so hard to bury. Memories of my own loss of my wife and daughter taken by fever years ago while I was away trying to make a better life for us. The anger I'd carried against the world since then had built these walls around me, thicker than wood or stone. But hearing their story stirred something I'd thought dead. The responsibility to protect, to fight, to care again. I walked to the kitchen, my steps heavy with hesitation. The pantry was nearly bare long ago. I'd stopped stocking more than the bare essentials, preparing for a life without visitors, without need. I could see the hunger in their eyes, the way the children's hands reached for scraps, the way the smallest girl's lips trembled as she looked around uncertainly. I told them I'd make something to eat, but the kitchen felt colder than the outside air. As I worked, the women gathered quietly in the corner, whispering low prayers or perhaps memories of better days. Before I could return with the food, the oldest woman spoke again, this time with a warning in her voice. Someone was coming. A man on horseback had ridden past the road not long before they arrived, asking questions, searching for them. I felt a chill colder than the autumn wind. Danger had followed them here. And by sheltering them, I was putting myself in the crosshairs too. But I couldn't turn away. I wasn't the man I used to be, not anymore. When I brought the food to the table, their gratitude was quiet but sincere. The children ate slowly, their energy returning with each bite, their eyes growing brighter. For a moment, the house felt less like a tomb and more like a home, but the peace was fragile, shattered within hours by the sound of horses' hooves pounding against the dry earth. I peered through the cracked window and saw 2 men approaching, one lean and harsh, the other older, wearing the badge of law but with eyes as cold and corrupt as the man beside him. The man with the badge was familiar Sheriff Marcus, a name I hadn't heard in years, but one I never wanted to see again. He was the kind of man who looked the other way when justice was bought and sold. The lean man was Garrett, the enforcer for the boarding house, a man who didn't just want to bring the women back but to claim them as property. I grabbed my rifle, stepping onto the porch to face them. The confrontation was tense, the air thick with years of anger and grief. Garrett's threats were blunt, his words dripping with entitlement and cruelty. Sheriff Marcus tried to mask his complicity with false smiles and empty threats, but I saw the truth behind his eyes. Fear that the past he'd buried might rise again. The women stayed behind me, standing firm despite their fear. The boy spoke out, his small voice trembling but clear, telling these men his mother was not for sale, that she was no one's property. It was a small act of courage that cut deeper than any bullet. The standoff stretched on, the threat of violence hanging over us like a storm cloud ready to break. But then, from the ridge behind the approaching men, came the sound of more hooves. 5 riders, armed and grim-faced, led by Wade McKinley, a respected rancher known for his honesty and sense of justice. His arrival shifted the balance. The sheriff faltered, and even Garrett hesitated. McKinley's presence was a reminder that some lines could not be crossed without consequences. Words were exchanged, truths spoken that laid bare the corruption that had poisoned the town and the boarding house. The women's plight was no longer hidden behind silence or fear. They had allies now. But Garrett, desperate and dangerous, pulled a gun, threatening the children's lives to force submission. The moment was a test of everything I'd become. Everything I'd buried beneath years of solitude. Then, in a heartbeat, the women's courage shone through. They stood as a wall between the threat and their children, ready to sacrifice themselves to keep their young ones safe. It was the kind of bravery that demanded a reckoning. I knew then I could no longer hide behind my silence. The fight wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. The rifle in my hands felt lighter, almost alive, as I stepped forward and made the choice to stand against the injustice, against the men who saw human lives as mere currency. Shots rang out, breaking the quiet that had held me captive for so long. The first bullet sent Garrett reeling, the rest forcing the corrupt sheriff to reconsider his loyalties. This standoff ended not with surrender, but with a hard promise. No more silence, no more turning away. The women, their children, and the strangers who became something like family stood together, facing the dawn of a new day. That night, as the house filled with the sounds of children's laughter and whispered stories, I realized that my silence had not been peace, it had been a prison. And now, with these broken but unbroken souls beside me, I was beginning to live again. The first night after the standoff passed with a strange mixture of exhaustion and fragile hope. The children, for the first time in days, slept soundly in the small back room I'd cleared for them, their soft breathing a quiet melody that filled the silence I hadn't realized had become deafening. The women sat together in the dim light of the parlor, whispers barely escaping their lips, voices laced with relief and the kind of fear that doesn't fade overnight. I watched them from the doorway, feeling like an intruder in my own home, a stranger who had invited chaos inside, yet unable to deny the warmth their presence had kindled in the hollow spaces of my heart. The sun rose the next morning, casting long shadows over the dry earth, and with it came the harsh reminder that this reprieve was temporary. The lawman and the enforcer had not been the only ones looking for them. Rumors traveled fast in the small town beyond the hills, and their pursuers would not give up easily. I found myself pacing the floor, my fingers tracing the worn wood of the table where a small girl had carefully placed Emma's wooden horsey, silent symbol of loss and hope intertwined. I realized then how much I had avoided the past, how deeply I had buried the memories of my wife and daughter's last days. And yet here they were, brought back to life by the courage of these women who had lost everything yet refused to be broken. I made a silent vow that day. No matter the cost, I would protect them. It was a promise I hadn't made to anyone in years, not even to myself. The women began to settle into a routine, each day a small victory over the trauma they carried. Clarabelle, the eldest, started to teach the children letters and numbers, reclaiming some sense of normalcy. Mercy, with her gentle hands, tended to the garden behind the house, coaxing life from the dry soil, while Violet, quiet but resolute, repaired the worn curtains and blankets, sewing together the tattered pieces of their scattered lives. Together, they transformed my lonely ranch into a place where life dared to grow again. But the danger never truly left. Each day brought the possibility of new threat, strangers in the distance, unfamiliar faces watching from the edges of the woods, the constant ache of knowing that every moment of peace could be shattered. I reinforced the fences, checked the guns, and kept a wary eye on the horizon. But more than anything, I prepared myself for the fight I knew was coming. One evening, as the sky bled orange and purple, a messenger arrived, a battered horse and a hurried rider, bringing news that sent a cold wave through my veins. The boarding house was mobilizing more men, more hunters, determined to reclaim what they saw as theirs. They didn't just want the women and children, they wanted to send a message that no one could defy them. The weight of that threat settled over us like a storm. We gathered inside, the women sharing what little information they had, while the children clung to each other in fear. The small boy Samuel looked up at me with wide eyes, searching for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. But I couldn't show fear not now. I told them we would stand together, that this land was no longer mine alone but ours to protect. Plans were made, quietly hidden paths mapped, lookout points chosen, traps set. The women became warriors in their own right, their resolve fierce despite their fears. Nights were spent in whispered training, teaching the children how to stay quiet, how to hide, how to survive. It was hard, brutal work to turn victims into survivors, but I saw something in their eyes that no amount of cruelty had managed to erase, a spark of defiance, a refusal to be broken. Days blurred into weeks. We built more than just defenses. We built a fragile family stitched together by shared pain and hope. I found myself laughing quietly at the children's games, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Clarabelle's soft voice telling stories of better days, Mercy's gentle humming as she baked simple bread, Violet's steady hands weaving new blankets. Life was messy, unpredictable, and for the first time, I welcomed it. But the past was relentless. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, a distant shout shattered the calm. Riders appeared on the horizon, fast and determined. The boarding house's men had come back more numerous, more ruthless. The fight was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. We moved quickly, herding the children to hidden places I'd prepared, standing ready with rifles and resolve. The women stood with me on the porch, faces set with a mixture of fear and fierce courage. The attackers dismounted, their eyes scanning, weapons ready, confident they would take back what they claimed. But they had underestimated the bond we'd forged, the strength found in shared scars and unyielding spirit. The battle was fierce, but brief shots rang out, horses whinnied, and the dry earth drank the dust and blood of desperate men. I stood firm, protecting those who could not protect themselves, fueled by memories of loss and the promise of new life. When the dust settled, the attackers fled, broken and defeated, and for the first time in years I saw hope, not just for the women and children, but for myself. We had survived. The ranch, once a fortress of solitude, was now a bastion of resilience and love. In the quiet aftermath, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the children chase each other beneath the golden sky, their laughter weaving through the air like a healing balm. The women gathered nearby, their faces softening as they allowed themselves a moment of peace. And I understood, with a clarity that cut through years of pain, that this unexpected family had given me something I thought I'd lost forever: the courage to live, to hope, and to fight for what truly matters. Days turned into weeks, and the fragile peace we had fought so hard to secure settled over the ranch like a fragile glass dome, beautiful, yet terrifyingly easy to shatter. The women and children began to breathe easier, but I could feel the tension coiled beneath the surface. A quiet but persistent reminder that we had not escaped the shadows that chased them. Every morning I watched the sun rise over the horizon with a mixture of hope and dread, knowing that at any moment, the quiet could be broken again by the harsh crack of gunfire or the thundering hooves of the relentless pursuers. Clarabelle worked tirelessly to restore a semblance of normal life, teaching the children under the cracked roof of the parlor, while Mercy turned the kitchen into a small bakery, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the dusty air like a promise of renewal. Violet's garden flourished under her care, the green shoots and blooms a stark contrast to the harsh wilderness beyond the fence. Yet the smiles on their faces, especially the children's, could not fully mask the scars beneath the haunted looks, the sudden flinches at a raised voice or unexpected noise. I was no stranger to pain or loss, but watching these women and children reclaim their lives in the shadow of danger struck a chord deeper than I expected. My own past whispered in every quiet corner, the laughter I'd lost, the nights spent holding a fevered child, the unbearable silence after the storm. The ranch was no longer a refuge from the world. It had become a battlefield, a sanctuary, and a home all at once. As the days grew longer and summer crept in, the threat we lived under became more tangible. One evening, the distant rumble of hooves echoed through the Valleja sound that froze my blood. The men had returned, this time with reinforcements. Their numbers were greater, their intent clear. They wanted to end this once and for all. We had prepared for this moment, but nothing could erase the weight of knowing that more violence was coming. That night, the women and I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, voices low as we planned defenses and escape routes. The children lay huddled in their beds, their innocent trust in us both a balm and a burden. I realized then that protecting them wasn't just about guns or fences, it was about holding on to hope when hope seemed impossible. The next day was a blur of activity boards nailed to windows, sharpened stakes planted along the perimeter, signal fires prepared for alarms. Clarabelle's strength was awe-inspiring. Despite the fear etched into her features, she carried herself with a grace born of necessity and unyielding will. Mercy's hands never ceased moving, baking, sewing, tending to every detail, while Violet's quiet determination grounded us all. And I, who had lived alone for so long, found myself thrust into a role I had long avoided, that of protector, leader, and fierce defender of these lives entrusted to me. The day of reckoning arrived under a heavy sky. The first sign was the sharp crack of a rifle shot, followed by the thunder of many horses charging down the dusty road. The boarding house's men, led by the same ruthless enforcer, swept over the landscape like a storm, intent on reclaiming what they believed was theirs. We fought with everything we had, rifles barking, fists swinging, hearts pounding in raw terror and defiance. The children cried and hid, but we would not let their innocence be stolen again. In the chaos, I caught sight of Clarabelle standing tall, face set like steel as she shielded her daughter, eyes blazing with a courage I thought I'd lost the capacity to recognize. Mercy fought beside her, while Violet moved with silent precision, protecting the youngest children. The battle was brutal, the night filled with gunfire and shouted orders, but something had changed. In me no longer was I the man hiding from the world's cruelty. I was a man rising against it. When dawn finally broke, the attackers lay broken and defeated, their retreat marked by the dust they kicked up in haste. We were battered but unbroken. The victory was bittersweet. There were wounds that would never fully heal, scars visible and invisible, but for the first time in years, I felt a spark of genuine hope. The women and children gathered on the porch, faces streaked with dirt and tears, but shining with the quiet pride of survivors. I looked at them, at the life we had forged together against all odds, and knew that this ranch, this home, was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us, to the laughter that now echoed through the halls, to the courage that had been rekindled, to the promise of new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, the women and I worked to rebuild what had been damaged, not just the physical structures, but the broken pieces of trust and safety that had been shattered. Clarabelle spoke quietly of dreams for the Futura School for the children, a place where they could learn and grow free from fear. Mercy talked of opening a bakery in town, a simple hope that felt revolutionary. Violet's garden blossomed with new life, a testament to resilience and the beauty of healing. And I found myself walking through the fields, watching the children chase butterflies and play among the wildflowers, feeling the weight of loneliness lift from my shoulders. The past still haunted me. Of course, the memory of my lost family never faded, but with these women and children by my side, the future felt possible. The quiet rancher I once was had been replaced by a man who understood that strength came from connection, that courage meant opening your heart even when it hurt, and that sometimes the greatest battles were fought not with guns, but with love and unwavering resolve. Together, we had rewritten our story, one of survival, hope, and the fierce determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. And in that, I found a purpose I had long thought lost. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, I knew that no matter what storms might come, this home, this family would stand strong. Because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful victories, and sometimes the quietest lives are the ones worth fighting for. The days that followed the violent confrontation brought a fragile calm, but beneath the surface, the weight of what had happened settled like a storm cloud, threatening to burst again. We all knew that our victory was only temporary, that the darkness which had chased these women and their children was not easily shaken off. The boarding house enforcers might have been driven away, but their masters, the corrupt powers behind that cruel system, were still out there, watching, waiting for their chance to reclaim what they thought was theirs. I found myself walking the perimeter of the ranch late into the night, the rifle slung over my shoulder, the cool wind carrying the faint echoes of past losses and future fears. Each step was heavy with memory, the ghosts of my own family's fate entwined with the fate of these strangers who had become my family. Clarabelle, Mercy, and Violet had started to rebuild their lives, but the scars on their souls were deep. I saw it in their eyes moments when they flinched at a sudden noise or a shadow that reminded them of the relentless pursuit. The children, innocent as they were, carried an unspoken burden, their laughter sometimes interrupted by dreams too heavy for their age. Despite the hardships, hope was growing, a fragile sprout pushing through cracked earth. Clarabelle had taken it upon herself to teach the children, using tattered books and old lessons remembered from a life interrupted. Her voice was soft but steady, a beacon in the quiet chaos. Mercy's baking filled the house with the scent of warmth and comfort, while Violet's garden flourished, a riot of colors and life defying the harshness of the wilderness. Slowly, the ranch transformed from a place of refuge to a home, but the threat outside the fence line never fully dissipated. One evening, as twilight deepened and the sky blushed with the last light of day, the distant sound of hooves shattered the quiet once again. My heart clenched this time. They had come with a larger force, better armed and colder in intent. The peace we had carved out was under siege, and I knew that this fight would be our most desperate yet. We prepared in silence, each of us steeling ourselves for what was to come. The women moved with practiced determination, tending to the children and fortifying our defenses. I checked my rifle and loaded each round with deliberate care, knowing that failure was not an option. The first riders appeared like ghosts in the darkening landscape, men with hard eyes and harder hearts, their faces obscured by dust and shadow. Their leader, a man known only by whispered stories of cruelty and corruption, rode at the front, a cruel smile playing on his lips as if savoring the inevitable confrontation. They believed us weak, isolated, and vulnerable. They were wrong. The battle that unfolded was brutal and unrelenting. Shots rang out into the night, the sharp cracks echoing against the hills. We fought not just for our lives, but for the chance at a future one where children could grow without fear and where kindness was not punished but protected. Clarabelle moved with fierce grace, shielding her daughter even as she faced down our attackers. Mercy's voice, usually soft and comforting, rang out clear and commanding as she rallied the women and older children to safety. Violet's steady hands tended to the wounded, her calm presence a quiet defiance against the chaos. I stood at the forefront, every sense sharpened, my mind a whirlwind of past pain and present determination. Memories of loss surged through me, the nights holding my fevered child, the helplessness I had vowed never to feel again. But this time, I was not alone. We were bound together by something stronger than fear, by hope, by courage, and by the fierce will to survive. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the attackers faltered, their numbers dwindling under our fierce resistance. Exhausted but unyielding, we watched as the survivors retreated, swallowed by the rising sun and the promise of a new day. The cost was high. Wounds, both seen and unseen, marked us all, but we had held the line. In the quiet aftermath, as the sun bathed the ranch in golden light, I looked around at the faces of those who had stood beside me. The children, still trembling but safe, clung to their mothers. The women, bruised but unbroken, shared a look of fierce solidarity that spoke volumes. And I, a man who had lived years in solitude, felt something I hadn't in a long time, a flicker of belonging. The battle had changed everything. It had stripped away the last remnants of my isolation and forced me to confront the truth I had long avoided, that strength was not found in solitude, but in connection. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand and fight despite it. Together, we began the slow, painful process of healing, repairing broken fences, tending to wounds, and mending the fragile threads of trust that had been stretched to their limits. Clarabelle's school grew, a beacon of light for the children who had known too much darkness. Mercy's bakery became a gathering place for the town, a symbol of resilience and hope. Violet's garden bloomed wildly, a living testament to life's stubborn beauty. And I, once a man defined by loss and silence, found new purpose in the laughter that echoed through these walls, in the shared meals, the whispered stories, and the quiet moments of peace that now punctuated our days. The world beyond the ranch still held its dangers, and I knew the fight was far from over. But in that moment, surrounded by those I had come to call family, I understood that we were stronger than the darkness that sought to claim us. The silent life I had chosen was no longer an option, nor a refuge. It was a chapter closed, replaced by a story still being written on of survival, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of hardship. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky with hues of fire and hope, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my heart. No matter what storms would come, this home, this family would endure. Because sometimes, the greatest strength is found not in standing alone, but in standing together. And sometimes, the fiercest battles are fought not with weapons, but with the courage to open your heart and refuse to let fear win. The days after the attack brought a strange, uneasy peace to the ranchon, where the silence felt heavier than ever, laden with the weight of what could have been lost, and the precarious hope of what might yet be saved. As I moved through the house, hearing the quiet footsteps of the children, their hesitant laughter, and the soft murmur of voices slowly growing more comfortable with each other, I realized just how fragile our new reality was. Each morning, Clarabelle, Mercy, and Violet would rise before dawn, their faces set with determination as they began to rebuild not only their lives, but the shattered pieces of their pasts, piece by piece. Their resilience was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Clarabelle's hands, once so gentle and tender, now moved with a hardened resolve as she prepared lessons for the children. Mercy's smile, often fleeting, masked a quiet pain, and Violet's soft songs while tending the garden brought a bittersweet comfort to us all. But beneath their strength, the shadows of what they'd escaped clung tightly. The boarding house, the men who ran it, and the sinister system that allowed such cruelty to thrive were not distant memories, but active threats lingering just beyond the horizon. Our brief victory was a spark in the dark cone that had drawn attention, both good and bad. Every day, I patrolled the borders of the ranch with a watchful eye, rifle in hand, knowing that it was only a matter of time before the men would return with more force and less mercy. The nights were the hardest. I often found myself standing on the porch, staring into the vast expanse of wilderness, haunted by memories of my own losses, the fevered nights holding my daughters close, powerless to save them, the hollow silence that followed, and the endless years of solitude I had chosen to punish myself and keep the world at bay. Now, those ghosts mingled with the living presence of these women and children who had come to rely on me. It was a strange paradox, so they breathed new life into my broken world while reminding me of all I had lost. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in bruised purples and reds, a strange sense of foreboding settled over the ranch. The wind shifted, carrying scents and sounds that whispered of danger. I could feel it deep in my bones. A storm was coming, not just of nature but of men. The women sensed it too. Clarabelle gathered the children close, whispering soothing words as her eyes scanned the horizon. Mercy packed what little we could spare into worn bags, her fingers trembling slightly as she stuffed a loaf of bread and dried meat inside. Violet tended the garden one last time, her hands caressing the leaves as if saying goodbye. That night we huddled together in the dim light of the house, voices low, the children's restless sleep broken by nightmares too large for their young minds. I watched them, wondering how much more they could endure, and yet, marveling at their strength. Just before dawn, the sound of hooves shattered the fragile quiet once again. But this time, it was not the familiar riders who had come before. The horses thundered down the path with a wild urgency, their riders masked and armed to the teeth. This was no simple raid. This was a hunt. I grabbed my rifle and moved to the porch, signaling the women to take the children to the hidden cellar beneath the house, a place I had prepared long ago during my years of isolation, not for guests, but for myself. As the riders drew near, the air thick with tension, I steadied my breath, feeling the weight of every choice I had made up to this moment. They dismounted with brutal efficiency, surrounding the house like wolves circling prey. Their leader, a figure cloaked in shadows, stepped forward, a cruel smile twisting his lips as he called out demands and threats. But I was ready. The standoff that followed was fierce and unyielding. Bullets tore through the early morning light. Shouts echoed across the yard, and the air was heavy with dust, sweat, and fear. Yet, amidst the chaos, the women showed an unyielding courage that defied their terror. Clarabelle stood with fierce eyes, protecting her daughter even as she defied the men. Mercy's voice rose in commanding calls to keep the children safe, while Violet's calm hands tended the wounded, moving through the smoke and noise like a beacon of hope. As I fired shot after shot, I was reminded painfully of all I had buried inside: anger, grief, and the desperate hope for redemption. The fight stretched on, time blurring into a relentless struggle of survival. We were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. The bonds we had forged in those brief weeks were stronger than any bullet. Just when it seemed the attackers might overwhelm us, a new sound broke through the turmoil, the distant rumble of hooves coming to our aid. Friends from the nearby town, men and women who had heard whispers of the boarding house's cruelty and our stand against it, arrived with rifles and determination blazing in their eyes. The tide turned swiftly. The attackers, now faced with unexpected resistance, began to falter, retreating into the wilderness from whence they came. Exhausted and wounded, we gathered on the porch under a sky turning gold with morning light. The price had been steep. Bruises and broken bones marked our bodies, but none more than the invisible wounds etched into our hearts. Yet, in that moment, a profound sense of victory filled the air. We had survived, not just the attack, but the oppressive darkness that sought to consume us. And in surviving, we had sparked a flaming beacon for others who suffered in silence, a promise that kindness and courage could withstand even the darkest storms. As the days passed, the ranch blossomed into a sanctuary not only for us but for others seeking refuge. Clarabelle's school grew, welcoming children once lost in despair. Mercy's bakery became a symbol of resilience and hope, its sweet aromas drawing neighbors who brought news, friendship, and support. Violet's garden flourished wildly, a testament to life's stubborn beauty and renewal. And I, once a man defined by loss and silence, found myself alive again in the laughter of children chasing one another through the fields, in the shared stories around the fire, and in the quiet moments of peace that punctuated our days. The past, with all its pain, no longer held me captive. Instead, it had shaped me into someone who could protect, nurture, and stand unafraid. The silent life I had clung to was gone, replaced by a story still unfolding, a story of survival, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of hardship. Each sunset painted the sky with hues of fire and hope, a daily reminder that no matter the storms to come, we would endure. Because true strength is found not in standing alone, but in standing together. And sometimes, the greatest courage is the choice to open your heart and refuse to let fear win. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch transformed from a mere refuge into a thriving sanctuary where hope began to take root in even the darkest corners of our souls. The early days of tension and fear gradually gave way to a fragile but growing sense of community. As the women and children slowly began to heal from the scars left by their pasts, Clarabelle took the lead in establishing a small schoolhouse on the edge of the property, using whatever books and supplies we could scavenge or trade for in the nearby town. Each lesson was a step not just toward education but toward reclaiming stolen innocence, as the children's laughter and curious questions filled the quiet spaces that had long been filled only with silence and sorrow. Mercy, always resourceful, expanded her baking into a small business that drew customers from miles around. Neighbors who once eyed our isolated ranch with suspicion now came seeking the sweetbread and stories of resilience that Mercy offered with a shy smile. Violet's garden flourished wildly, producing vibrant blooms and fresh vegetables that nourished our growing family and stood as a living testament to life's stubborn will to persist. Yet beneath this newfound peace lurked the constant, gnawing awareness that danger was never far behind. The shadows of the boarding house's cruel owners still loomed, their reach extending beyond what we could see, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they sought to reclaim what they believed was theirs. I kept watch day and night, my rifle never far from hand, my mind haunted by memories of past failures and a fierce determination not to let history repeat itself. The women, too, were not idle. Clarabelle organized patrols along the property's perimeter, training the older children to recognize threats and signal for help. Mercy forged alliances with trusted locals, quietly weaving a web of support that extended beyond our fences. Violet's calm presence became a source of strength for all of us, her soft voice a balm in the darkest moments. One cold evening, as frost crept across the ground and the first stars blinked into existence, a messenger arrived from town with news that sent a ripple of urgency through our small community. A new threat was rising, an organized group with ties to the boarding house, more ruthless and better armed than any we had faced before. They were gathering men and resources, preparing to crush any resistance and reassert their brutal control over the women who dared to escape. The message was clear. Our sanctuary was now a battleground, and the safety we had fought so hard to build was at risk. The weight of this truth settled over me like a stone, but alongside the fear came a fierce resolve. I was no longer the broken man who fled the world. I was a protector, a leader, a guardian of those who had nowhere else to turn. I called a meeting that night beneath the flickering light of oil lamps, the faces of the women and children illuminated by hope and determination. We would not run. We would not hide. Together, we would stand and fight not just for ourselves, but for every soul trapped in the darkness beyond our borders. Plans were made with careful precision. Supplies were gathered, defenses reinforced, and allies rallied from neighboring ranches and townsfolk who believed in our cause. Clarabelle and Mercy led training sessions for anyone willing and able to fight, teaching them how to wield tools and weapons with skill born of necessity. Violet organized medical supplies and prepared for the inevitable wounds that would come with battle. As the days grew shorter and the chill of winter crept closer, so too did the tension in the air. Nights were spent listening for the telltale sounds of horses on the trail, the crack of a branch, the whisper of movement in the dark. The children were kept close, their innocent faces a constant reminder of what was at stake. I found myself standing on the porch more often than not, staring out into the night sky, wrestling with the ghosts of my past and the terrifying possibilities of the future. The memory of my daughters, lost so long ago, was no longer just a source of pain but a wellspring of strength. I vowed to never let another child suffer as they had. Then, one fateful dawn, the silence shattered. The enemy arrived in force. A tide of black-clad riders pouring down the hill with guns blazing and voices shouting commands that chilled the soul. Our defenses held firm, the years of preparation and training put to the test as we fought with every ounce of courage we possessed. Bullets tore through the cold morning air, shouts and cries mingling with the roar of gunfire and the pounding of hooves. I moved through the chaos like a man possessed, shielding the women and children, returning fire with grim determination. Clarabelle stood beside me, her eyes blazing with fierce resolve as she rallied those around her. Mercy tended the wounded with steady hands, offering comfort amid the carnage, while Violet moved like a guardian angel, her presence a beacon of calm in the storm. The battle raged for hours, the line between life and death razor thin. Friends and foes alike fell, the price of freedom exacted in blood and tears. But as the sun reached its zenith, the tide began to turn. Reinforcements from our allies arrived just in time, their arrival tipping the balance and forcing the attackers into a disorganized retreat. Exhausted and battered, we stood victorious, though the cost was etched deeply into our hearts. The children clung to their mothers, the women wiped away tears and blood alike, and I felt a profound sense of connection that transcended the pain. In that moment, I understood that this fight was bigger than any one of us. It was a battle for dignity, for justice, for the right to live free from fear and oppression. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a symbol of resistance and hope. And as I looked out over the land we had defended with our lives, I knew that no matter what storms lay ahead, we would face them together unbroken, unyielding, and united by the unshakable bonds forged in the fires of struggle and love. After the brutal battle that left scars not just on our land but deep within our souls, the ranch settled into an uneasy calm that felt both like a victory and a warning. The enemy's retreat was not a surrender but a temporary withdrawal, a promise that they would return hungrier and more ruthless than ever. We understood then that our fight had only just begun, that this fragile peace was a brief pause before the storm. Days blurred together as we rebuilt defenses, patched wounds, and whispered plans for what lay ahead. Each morning greeted us with a dawn heavy with anticipation, the weight of the unseen threat pressing down on every moment. The children learned to move quietly, to hide when shadows lengthened and strange sounds drifted through the trees. The women grew stronger, their spirits hardened like tempered steel forged in fire and sorrow. Clarabelle, who had once been fragile and uncertain, now stood as a pillar of unwavering strength, her voice carrying the steady resolve of someone who had glimpsed the abyss and refused to fall. Mercy's bakery flourished despite the dangers, becoming a haven not only of food but of stories and solidarity, neighbors stopping by to share news, to offer help, to remind us all we were not alone. Violet's garden bloomed with renewed life, its flowers and vegetables a testament to perseverance and hope. But behind this veil of normalcy, the danger gathered like a dark cloud on the horizon. Word from the town was grim. The boarding house's owners were not just content to recapture their escaped prisoners. They were expanding their influence, corrupting officials, and silencing anyone who dared to stand against them. I felt the old weight of helplessness creep back, memories of lost family threatening to drown me in despair. Yet this time, I was not alone. These women and children, my newfound family, were my reason to fight, my shield against the shadows. One evening, as a cold wind swept through the trees and the sun dipped behind jagged peaks, a rider arrived, galloping through the gate with urgency in his eyes. His message was clear and chilling. The enemy was sending reinforcements, a larger force intent on crushing us once and for all. The news sent a ripple of fear through our ranks but also ignited a fierce determination. We had come too far to surrender now. That night, under the ghostly glow of the moon, we gathered once more to prepare for the battle that could decide our fate. Plans were drawn, weapons checked, and hearts steeled for the inevitable storm. The children were tucked safely away, their innocent dreams guarded by the fierce vigilance of those who would protect them at all costs. I found myself wandering the quiet halls of the house, haunted by memories of laughter long gone, yet buoyed by the laughter now filling the rooms. The wooden horse, carved years ago for a daughter lost to fever, sat quietly on the shelf, a symbol of both past pain and new beginnings. As dawn broke, the enemy came like a flood, a dark wave crashing against the fortress we had built from hope and desperation. Gunfire echoed across the hills, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, the ground trembling beneath the charge of horses and feet. We fought with every breath, every heartbeat a defiance against the darkness threatening to consume us. Clarabelle moved like a warrior queen, rallying those around her with a voice that refused to break. Mercy's hands, steady and sure, tended wounds even as chaos swirled. Violet stood at my side, her presence a calm anchor in the storm. The battle raged for hours, blood mingling with dirt, cries of pain and courage entwined in the air. I remembered my daughters, their faces, their laughter, and let that memory fuel my resolve. This time, I would not fail them or these women who had come to mean everything to me. The tide turned slowly, our unity and determination pushing back the attackers inch by hard-won inch. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm us, reinforcements arrived, friends from nearby ranches and towns who refused to let injustice reign. Their arrival shifted the balance, scattering the enemy into a chaotic retreat. The victory was hard-fought and dearly paid for, but it was ours. As the dust settled and silence fell once more, I looked around at the faces etched with pain and relief, knowing that though the battle was won, the war was far from over. The women and children had not just survived. They had grown stronger, more resilient, and I had found in them a family that healed old wounds I thought would never close. The ranch, once a place of solitude and sorrow, had become a beacon of hope and resistance in a world that often seemed too dark to bear. And as I stood there, rifle in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, I understood at last that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand and fight despite it, that sometimes the greatest strength came from opening your heart to others, even when it felt like it might break again. We had become more than survivors. We had become a force that no darkness could extinguish. The days after the battle were heavy with reflection and quiet rebuilding. The faces of those I protected showed the toll the fight had taken not just on their bodies, but on their spirits. Yet amid the scars and weariness, there was an unmistakable spark of hope. The children laughed again, their innocence slowly returning like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The women, once haunted by fear, now moved with a fierce determination that inspired me beyond words. I found myself opening up in ways I never thought possible, sharing stories of my lost family and the pain I had carried alone for so many years. They listened, understanding without judgment, and in their presence, the walls I had built around my heart began to crumble. Together, we planted new seeds both in the garden and in our lives each. Small victory, a step toward healing, and a future free from the shadows that once threatened to consume us. But the peace was fragile. News from the nearby town whispered of the enemy regrouping, their threats growing more desperate and violent. The fight was far from over, and the choices ahead would test every ounce of courage we had left. Yet, for the first time in years, I felt ready, because I was no longer alone. We were no longer just survivors. We were a family bound by strength, love, and an unbreakable will to protect each other come what may. The tension that had settled like a dark cloud over the ranch thickened with every passing day. The quiet moments we'd come to cherish were now punctuated by distant rumors and the growing presence of unfamiliar faces in the nearby town faces that whispered of impending danger. Despite the fear, I saw the women and children grow stronger, more determined to reclaim their lives rather than just survive. I found myself once again preparing the land, fixing fences and readying defenses, not just for my sake, but for theirs. The nights were long and filled with restless thoughts as I grappled with the ghosts of my past and the uncertain future looming ahead. Yet, in the midst of this, a new sense of purpose anchored me. I wasn't the broken man who'd fled into isolation years ago. Now, I was a protector, a guardian of those who had trusted me with their safety and hope. When the enemy finally came back bolder, crueler, and relentless, it was no longer just a fight for survival, but a battle to reclaim dignity, justice, and the family we had forged in the shadows. And as the first light of dawn broke over the hills, I knew one thing with certainty. No matter the cost, I would never let them take this sanctuary away from us again. The last days at the ranch felt like the final act of a play, where every moment was charged with the weight of everything we had lived through. The women and children I had come to see as family were no longer just survivors. They were warriors who had endured unspeakable horrors and refused to let fear dictate their future. Each morning, as I watched the sun rise over the open fields, I felt a quiet pride that had once seemed impossible to reclaim. The silence that had once suffocated me was replaced by laughter, the patter of little feet, and the warm, steady hum of life returning to a place long abandoned by hope. But that peace was fragile, and the shadows of the past lingered close. The men who had hunted them so relentlessly came again, this time with the full weight of corruption and cruelty behind them, certain that fear would drive us apart and that we would crumble. Yet they had underestimated the strength forged through shared pain and newfound trust. On that fateful day, when the dust rose heavy over the ranch and the cold barrel of a gun faced us down, it was not just the fight for survival that stirred in my heart, but a fierce determination to protect what we had built. As the first shot rang out, breaking the long-held silence, it echoed not just as a warning to our enemies, but as a declaration of who we had become. The fight was brutal, but through the chaos, I saw the courage of those women who refused to bow, the bravery of the children who looked to us for safety, and the strength in myself that I thought was lost forever. We didn't just defend a piece of land that day. We defended the right to choose life over fear, love over loneliness, and hope over despair. When the dust settled and silence returned, it was no longer a silence of isolation but of victory. Our victory. The kind that doesn't erase scars but shows the world that healing is possible, that second chances are real, and that the courage to protect others is the greatest kind of strength. As I stood there watching the children play with the old wooden horse once, a symbol of loss, now a beacon of new beginnings, I realized that this story was never just about me or those women. It was about the power we all hold to rewrite our past, to stand up against darkness, and to find light even in the loneliest of places. So, if you've stayed with me to this last chapter, thank you. Your presence means more than words can say. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Click on the video on your screen now to dive into another tale where courage meets fate, and lives are forever changed. Because sometimes, all it takes is one choice-own act of kindness to turn a life around. Subscribe, like, and join this journey, where every story is a step toward hope, and every ending opens a door to a new beginning. Remember, you're never truly alone when you let others stand beside you.